The misconception is that you can just plug AI into supply chain and make it work. You can't. It's all about the data. It's all about the integrations. And it's about not just your accessing your data, but also your supply chain ecosystem data. That means your third-party vendors, your third-party suppliers, service providers, getting all of that into one place and then applying the AI on top of that.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sustainable Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Danny. Danny, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me to the show, Tom. My name is Danny He. I'm the founder and CEO of Soapbox. We're based out of Santa Monica, California, and we are a supply chain technology company.
And Danny, before we get into that, tell me a little bit about your background, because as we mentioned on the intro call earlier, which no one here has had the opportunity to hear, you don't come from a supply chain background. So give me a little bit of the history of that. Why did you decide to set up a supply chain company?
Sure, yeah. So my background has always been tangentially related to technology, but I've done a little bit of everything. I ran a Michelin recommended restaurant in Brooklyn, did my MBA in New York City, and then went on to IBM to manage a pretty large global customer. From there, that's really where I learned enterprise level engagements, technologies, how large companies look at technology, how to deploy technology. And then from there, I shifted over to Royal Caribbean. That's where I cut my teeth in app development. And then that's when really I got a crash course in user experience, guest experience in Royal Caribbean's case. I think that really helped me give a really different view of how products are meant to be used or can be used, the art of the possible. From there, I transitioned over to a private equity group. I'm back in Los Angeles, where I'm from. We led the operations for this group that had a nine-figure annual revenue, 52 brands, all within this space. My job was to be able to consolidate the operations within these brands. So create an internal third-party logistics service, launch the e-commerce for the major brands, and modernize this business. At the time, it was 25 years old, and the warehouse was literally using pen and paper, which a lot of companies do, surprisingly. Yeah, and as you know. And so through this process, as we were searching for different technologies to help us support this engagement, we found it to be not only convoluted, but really fragmented. And so we actually reached out to FedEx, worked with FedEx Consulting to really identify some of the top solutions in the space. They recommended us a series of their compatible technology partners. And what was really interesting there is that our technology stack was basically non-existent. We had a on-premise ERP from early 2000s, and then that was it. That was like literally it. And so you can imagine the technology gaps for 20 years, right? That had to have existed. And so through this process, we really tried to figure out what we needed from order management and inventory management, warehouse management, parcel, right? Returns, freight, everything, basically storefront management. And as it turns out, every single one of these technology pieces, workflows, had different technology stacks. That was really well, this is kind of weird because it's the same data flowing into all of these technologies. All these technologies are manipulating a part of that data set, and then it's all spitting that full set of data back into the ERP, right? So there's some data consistencies there, even if there's workflow inconsistencies and disconnects. So FedEx, what they did was they just brought us a bunch of the best in class of these technologies, best warehouse management, best shipping tools, et cetera. So when we were looking at these technology stacks, we had to effectively connect it on our own. We had to figure out the integrations. And the purpose of that was everybody effectively thinks their business is unique, their workflows are unique, their data is unique, and so they want a custom bespoke solution. Of course, that's not the case, right? The similarities in supply chain are quite often minimal. And what it comes down to is the data is exactly the same. It's just how you work with that data that's different. And so when we distill all of this data down, everything came down to either an order, inventory, or shipment. And that's it. That's everything in supply chain distills down to those three sets of data. So we had to figure out these integrations on our own. We didn't have the technology or the resources to be able to figure that on our own. So we had to outsource it, just like everybody else. And these technologies, even though you're able to connect them, you still had to operate it separately. So you effectively had to have 7, 8 different tools to make your business function optimally. And that was, to me, just, it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense because the data was the same. It didn't make sense because the workflows were tangentially really next to each other, right? Like it's one workflow to the next, to the next, to the next. And when we kind of raised this to FedEx, they came to us and said, well, nothing like this exists like that. You can use an ERP. So we met with a couple of ERPs, and it was like a 7-figure install with a 5-figure a monthly fee. And we had to, it was just ridiculous. We had to hire somebody that had a PhD that knew how to run the system. And oh, hey, by the way, it still didn't do the things it needed to do. It just consolidated the data where it needed to be. That's where I set forth and created Soapbox. Soapbox is that end-to-end supply chain technology. We connect 4 key points within the supply chain. One is the operating workflows. So we're inventory management, order management, warehouse management, parcel, freight, returns, third-party logistics management. Really, the final frontier for us now is ocean containers and tracking international shipments. So once we have that, we'll be able to establish full traceability and trackability for anything that you can count, and it moves, we're tracking it, and it's from seed to soup. So it's a kind of a different and unique platform in that, not having the supply chain experience coming into this, for me, I'm just thinking of it in terms of the data. It's the same data all the way through. So let's create a platform that can work against that data rather than separate workflows. So that was the first piece of this. The second piece was then wrapping it around a middleware. So understanding that every company has third-party logistics at some point or another in their supply chain. And I think a big part of the systems out there, while it does a pretty good job of helping you understand your operations within your data set, it does a terrible job of consolidating your third-party operators and vendors and supply chain providers, service providers, and pulling that data in to give you a real-time view of your supply chain operations. And so we also understand that not everybody's going to use our technology, right? It's really hard for us to be able to displace existing warehouse management or transportation management, as an example. So we built a middleware around our system, and we use that to pull in data from these third-party systems for these third-party operators into our platform, and then we standardize the data. So that's the third pillar, is on top of the workflows and the middleware, we then standardize the data within our system. And we're able to do that because we have the workflows. So it doesn't matter whether the data is originating from your own service provider or a third-party service provider. We're able to pull that in and give you a really unified single pane view of your operations, kind of like a command center for your operations rather than an ERP where everything has already happened. And then finally, now that we have that end-to-end workflow, we can integrate into third-party data. We can then standardize that data. We then provide advanced analytics, really beyond forecasting. We call it beyond business intelligence, beyond BI, Soapbox beyond BI, because it is beyond BI. Forecasting assumes that you have strong historics that are going to be consistent with what's going to happen. But as we've found out in the last 5 years, right? Pandemic happens, recessions happen, things happen, macro events happen that really shape the way that either consumer behavior is affected or just something happens. And so you kind of need that real-time data to be able to then inform your supply chain. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in a really catastrophic situation where you're fulfilling against your forecasts, but your actuals don't meet that. And all of a sudden you're overproducing, you're losing millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars in inventory that's not going to sell.
Okay. And where does the name Soapbox come from?
I love that question because it is very near and dear to me. Back in the 1800s, before mass communication, right? The town square was where people would get their news and their information. If you had access to like a box, like a soapbox, you're able to go and stand and make your piece and, basically share your news. And to me, it was kind of really interesting because it really kind of leveled the playing field for the everyman versus the people who have power, prestige, money, influence. You can separate them from everybody else. They're on a platform and on a pedestal, right? So you have people on the pedestal and people who are on their soapbox. So for me, soapbox is always this idea that, this data in supply chain is pretty standardized across every company. It really is. It comes down to widgets and where it's being moved, how it's being moved, etc. So when you have that, it really doesn't matter whether you have an Etsy store and you're running your hobby out of your spare bedroom or your Fortune 10 company doing, hundreds of millions of dollars a day. It's the same data. And so that's what Soapbox means to me. And I hope Soapbox means to this ecosystem is the ability to be able to have the standardization and the equal playing field of data power.
Okay. Data power, I like it. And I mean, supply chains are drowning in data, but as you rightly pointed out, companies still struggle with visibility. So why is there so much fragmentation? Is it just an accident of history, the way things evolved separately? And why is it so hard then to consolidate all this fragmented data?
When I first started this, I thought about this for a long time, and I looked at probably hundreds of different technologies and did a lot of research in this space. I think that it's because of the fact that that's just how the technology developed. But I think that's really a symptom of the fact that every single thing in supply chain is a multi-billion-dollar sub-industry. So freight, you write $1 trillion. Parcel, nearly $1 trillion. Warehouse management, $1 billion. Inventory management, $1 billion. Everything. And then you get to a subset, robotics, right? Within the warehouse is $1 billion. First mile, last, everything is $1 billion. Every little piece of supply chain is $1 billion. So then you kind of think about the fact that, supply chain, it's a business. Most people who are starting companies in this space, they're trying to create a business. So why would you go and create a business that does more than $1 billion if you don't need it to? That's, I think, where, again, just being the outsider and not knowing that. When we first started, we're like, everything's all connected. Of course it is. Why would anybody look at any of this separately? Of course we're going to create a platform that did everything. So I think, there's a little bit of we didn't know, and so we just did it. But also that now kind of stepping back where everybody's focused on their multi-billion-dollar sub-industry, we're really focused on the multi-trillion-dollar supply chain ecosystem.
And seeing as all these solutions were essentially, I got to think, started out as point solutions, which have just developed from there. So you've got multiple different, now quite complex, but originally point solutions. You've decided to take the opposite approach and fix everything all in one go. Knowing what you know now, would you still take the same course?
Yeah, I would. And I would probably do things a little bit smarter than that we did before. Of course, everybody would. But I think we would have started in a different space. So when we first started this in 2019, we really focused on the order management, inventory management, and shipping, because that's really kind of where it felt like a lot of the pain points were in this space. Then COVID happened, right? And it kind of made sense because when COVID hit, there were a lot of businesses that had retail stores that, quite frankly, didn't know how to sell online. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have the technology. They didn't know. So for the first year, all of 2020, we ran webinars literally every single day, every single business day, 5 days a week, educating people on how to do e-commerce, how to get online, how to manage your inventory in a virtual environment, how to sell, what platforms to sell on, how to choose the best packaging, rates, etc. And so that's where our platform initially started. And then we pivoted, we added from there our warehouse management tool, our third-party management tool, freight management, returns, and it keeps building. If I had to start over again, I would probably start where the products are held at the warehouse level first, because that's ultimately going to be your source of truth. And ERP is not your source of truth in your data, unlike what most people think. It's actually at the warehouse level where things are actually being held. And it's actually at the transportation management level where it's being shipped. So when you have a platform like ours, where you have the end-to-end view and every touch point, again, whether it's being stored or it's being moved, we're tracking it, you're able to see at a unit level something that's going from one place, that's in one place, that's moved to another place, tracking that movement, and then getting to the second location, tracking that, and then from the second location, third, tracking that, and so on and so forth. So that traceability is pretty unique in supply chain. It's not quite unique in the food space because requirements for food traceability. But even so, I was surprised to find out that a lot of the traceability really kind of is captured at the destination level, not at the transportation level. So
Mm.
it's this facility or that facility that might be contaminated. There's not really too much thought on, well, what about the trucks? Maybe it's the trucks,
Mm.
right? Maybe it's like the spoilage because the truck's air condition for a run of milk went bad, right? And now it's spoiled, not because of the facilities, but because the truck. So to have that full view of, again, anything that's stored, distributed, or in transit, having that full view gives us kind of a unique data set in this space.
Okay. And this is the Sustainable Supply Chain podcast. So, what has all this got to do with sustainability?
Yeah, so I think we look at sustainability a little bit different. We look at it in terms of not just the things that you can take away, but the things that you never needed to begin with. So I'll give you an example is a product aging. Okay. So basically, as a standard, regardless of the company, the average number of products that get aged out, meaning that it was created, it's in retail or it's in storage, and it never got sold because it's just overstock, is between 5 and 25%, regardless of the company, regardless of the space. It's between 5 and 25%. That's a lot of inventory that you have to write off because you're not doing it. And so when I think of that, I'm not thinking of just the inventory that you were wasting. We're talking about packaging, right? We're talking about logistics that gets the
Mhm.
products from point A to point B, and then we have to dispose of it because you can't reuse a carton that is already being used for something else. And so that waste, I think, unlike I think the green initiatives that are fantastic in transforming the way that we look at supply chain, this kind of gets ahead of the issue before it even begins. If we're able to provide real-time views of your inventory, not only in your distribution, but also your wholesale and retail, and then track the sell-through of your products at a retail level, and be able to then calculate the average time it takes to replenish that product, we're then able to set alerts within our system that then allow you to be able to see, okay, well, it takes you on average 30 days to be able to actually fulfill this product to replenish it from the time you hit your purchase order to the time it's ready to be sold. It takes 30 days. So let's set an alert for 37 days, right? If the sell-through gets, based on the sell-through velocity, once it gets to 37 days, let's trigger a purchase order automatically or get it queued up so that somebody can review it and make that purchase order. Get the replenishment up to 30 days. So by the time it hits the retail location, you've got 7 days worth of inventory left, right? But that's just in time delivery. That's about as close to just in time delivery as you can get. So when you have inventory in a warehouse, when it's on a shelf and it's not sold, that's just money, right? That's just money, and that's waste. And that's, I think, what a future optimized supply chain looks like is accessible just-in-time delivery for every company.
Okay. Okay. So, minimizing waste is what we're talking about. Can you share any real world examples of how your better data visibility improved sustainability and profitability for a company?
The example I gave with the aging, we were working with a company, they identified that exact issue was they had multiple third-party logistics, 3PLs across the country. They had a 6-month shelf life product. And because of just the fact that the 3PLs themselves didn't keep a good record of the products, and the 3PLs were getting the products directly from the co-packers. And so although they had the data there, it wasn't connected to the mothership, the operating systems. And so the people who were actually pushing the sales along and creating promotions and actually selecting the products to go and sell, they were not the ones that had access to the aging data, right? So the demand side wasn't connected to the supply side. And so in that case, they had about 15% worth of inventory every single month that had to be burned through because it just aged out. So for us to be able to then identify those products across every single 3PL, not only as it comes into those 3PLs, but then to be able to set notifications up for that company to then let them know, hey, these products are going to get aged out within the next 45 days. You should get these out of this warehouse and run a promotion on it so that at the very least you can monetize it in some way. This also extends to grocers, right? I mean, you see this more often in grocers than any place else. Is if you see certain things, they just don't sell for whatever reason. More oftentimes than not in grocery stores, they'll just throw it away. In many grocers' case, they just send it back to the vendor and they get a full refund of all the products that they didn't sell, right? Well, that's a lot of money and a lot of waste. So if we're able to identify for the brands, hey, you got something at a retail level, it's not selling. It's not just at the distribution level, at the retail level, something's not selling. Let's make sure that we're running promotions on these things immediately so you can preempt any actions taken by the retailer itself. Well, that's money on both sides that everybody can make along the way, right? So those are real world examples of what we're doing now with customers.
And obviously, AI is the buzzword of the decade. How do you see AI and BI making a difference in supply chain efficiency, not just as hype, but in real world applications?
Yeah, so our BI tool is AI powered, it's AI enabled. But what's unique about our technology, and we're partnered in with GraphFlow AI. GraphFlow AI is based on the Graph database. And the Graph database and the Graph AI, what's unique about it is number one, it doesn't require training. And number two, it doesn't require direct access to your data. And in fact, it just creates queries based on natural language processing, right? And you ask it questions, you want it to generate dashboards, you want to create notifications, you want to create workflows based on queries that you can have on the data. And it'll tell you whether it can generate those views or workflows or notifications or not. And it'll pull the data constantly through. When we're talking about something like that, it becomes truly predictive. It's not forecasting, it's using real-time demand data and then linking it with your supply chain automatically without any additional levers that your planning agent or somebody that's in supply chain has to run these crazy algorithms and these dashboards. It's all AI driven, right? So not so much in what it is producing, but in the way that it's processing what you're trying to ask. So as an example, if you wanted to be able to create a notification that identifies every product that gets within 45 days of aging, then we could do that. How much data and integrations would you have to be able to get all of this together, right? That's a lot. And it's dynamic and it's, you have to calculate the sell through of products and what's going in versus what's coming out. And so just asking something like that and creating a dashboard and doing it at your fingertips at a user level, that's pretty powerful.
And what would you say is the biggest misconception about AI in supply chain management today?
I think that there are certain things that people kind of overstate what AI does. Really, in supply chain, I think AI has the most pragmatic use cases because what it really comes down to is AI is supposed to really augment human work and simplify human work and create human efficiencies. Supply chain is, for all intents and purposes, a very human capital intensive business in every sense of the word, right? You don't need technology to make it run. At its core, it's about getting physical products. If we're able to synchronize the data, then AI makes sense. What AI doesn't make sense in is being able to potentially optimize in a specific workflow for a specific thing with no context to anything else. It's like putting a Ferrari engine into a 1980 sedan. It's not going to run the way that you think it is. And in fact, you're just going to make it break faster. When you don't have good data, it's not going to work. So to the point of, okay, well, what's the misconception? The misconception is that you can just plug AI into supply chain and make it work. You can't. It's all about the data. It's all about the integrations. And it's about not just your accessing your data, but also your supply chain ecosystem data. That means your third-party vendors, your third-party suppliers, service providers, getting all of that into one place and then applying the AI on top of that.
And If you could solve just one of today's supply chain challenges overnight, what would it be?
Oh, that's a loaded question. If we could solve one of the questions for a supply chain, I think the biggest gap that people have is being able to have the lack of capability to do just in time replenishment. And I think if we were to able to solve that problem, that would go a long way to solving many up and downstream issues within supply chain, from planning to resource management to really everything in supply chain is just eh, the less inventory and the less movement, unnecessary movement you have, the more efficient and effective and more sustainable your ecosystems can be.
Obviously, now we're starting to see supply chain disruptions are becoming the norm, unfortunately. What would you say is one underrated trend that businesses aren't paying enough attention to but should be?
There's still a lot of data processing that happens manually and through analog means within supply chain, especially in freight and in the warehouses. There's a lot of data entry that happens. Quite simply, every single one of these companies just throw manpower at it, every single one. And it's not to say that we want to be able to necessarily take any jobs away from people, but think about the time it takes to be able to for a truck driver and the carrier and the broker to get paid by the customer. What if that were able to be streamlined because that data is synchronized instead of having every single one of these steps having manual process, which is the case right now, right? It's just the case right now. The carrier has a manual process on the proof of deliveries, then they hand off the same documents to the broker, and then they have to repeat the same process for them, and and so on. So to the nth degree of how the value chain of what you need within this space. So um, there are technologies that exist now that can simplify that and streamline that. And we're working on something now that can really shift the way that you're looking at that full set of data. So when we're marrying inventory movement with load movement and freight, and you're not just seeing here's load 1, 2, 3, and then you have to use one reference. Okay, 1, 2, 3, load 1 through 3 in TMS is order 4, 5, 6 in your ERP, and oh hey, by the way, it's product ABC in your warehouse. That's 3 systems of record to be able to just track one thing. To have all of that in an operating system and to be able to then attach any sort of documents, proof of delivery, and then have automated audits. Those are the things that I think really shift the way that you will do business in supply chain. And I think that's the core of what we want. That's what technology is supposed to do. Is I think that certainly having simplification is fantastic and it's necessary where you can. But if you can change the way people do business in an industry, that's something else. And that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to change the way supply chain is being done.
Okay, well, with that in mind, if we check back with you in 5 years, what's one major shift in supply chain operations you predict we'll be talking about?
Yeah, I hope that in 5 years, we can talk about how data in supply chain and the fidelity within the data, so clean, clear data in supply chain, data is accessible, that it can be attained, that it doesn't have to be fragmented. And even if it was fragmented, there are ways to be able to pull that together and standardize it in a meaningful and insightful way. I think everybody talks about data in supply chain, right? Everybody talks about it because there's so much of it. But how many people are actually leveraging it in a meaningful way? And I hope that in 5 years, we're able to shift some of the paradigms to be able to say, all right, well, this is actually how you can view data. And this is what you can actually do when you have full supply chain visibility and you've got great data fidelity along with that.
Okay. Left field question. If you could have any person or character, alive or dead, real or fictional, as a spokesperson for data visibility in supply chain and sustainability, who would it be and why?
That is a great question. And so there's a name that came to mind immediately, and I don't know why, but I have an idea. So let me try to rationalize this. The name is it's Robin Williams, which is a weird one. But I think Robin Williams, if there was somebody to evangelize this, and why he would be a good person is because obviously he had the demons that he had to overcome, and and he took his own life. But he also created so much joy and happiness in the world. And when he spoke, everybody listened. Everybody listened. There wasn't anybody that didn't hang on to Robin Williams' words. And I think for his ability to be able to distill something that creates something positive despite having something so negative happen to him is a gift. In supply chain, I think there's a lot of pain and a lot of room for improvement in this space. If we were to be able to have somebody that can help position it rather than to be able to solve the pain, but to be able to then see like, hey, there's actually a better way to do things. And I can't think of anybody with the warmth of Robin Williams that can say, hey, like this is clarity. This is what clarity looks like. And this is what happiness in supply chain looks like. Well, who's happy in supply chain, right? So that would be for me. I think Robin Williams would probably be the person.
We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Danny. Is there any question that I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
Yeah, I think in terms of contemplating the supply chain and within AI, we look at a lot of the public companies, 10Ks and their shareholder notes, and 2025, it's supposedly the year of AI, right? Everybody's doing AI this year. And I think certainly that's the direction that we want to take, but I would caution that companies look at AI not as a problem that can be solved, not as something that can solve problems in a silo. AI is only as good as the data that it has access to. And too often when we're talking to companies in this space about AI and about advanced analytics and everything, we don't hear enough about integrations into third-party data, and we don't hear enough about data fidelity. What we do hear is the data we have is kind of trash, right? You hear it all the time. So the reason that I bring that up is I don't want AI and BI in supply chain to feel like cloud in the late 2000s, where it felt like it was too early because people didn't understand the implications of it. The implications in this case is right in front of everybody. The data is right in front of everybody, and it is accessible. So I would say before everybody kind of jumps into AI, I think they really need to understand that the 0 to 1 in AI isn't identifying the workflows. The 0 to 1 is identifying your data infrastructure that can support the AI. And that's something that's what we do. That's what our platform does. So that's what I'd like to be able to leave with is let's look at the data in supply chain.
Okay, very good, very good. Danny, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
Sure, yeah. Happy to take any direct inquiries on LinkedIn. You can search me at Danny He. Last name is He. Soapbox, Soapbox. Our website is soap-bx.com. Feel free to reach out to us. Happy to be able to talk supply chain. I love nerding about this stuff. So anybody that's interested in talking about it, I'm always happy to have that conversation.
Fantastic. Great. Daniel, it's been fascinating. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Tom.